July 11th, 2026, and something is burning inside Iran that nobody officially set on fire. The Polac Petrochemical Refinery in Iran's Lorestan province is gone. Not damaged, not partially affected. Gone, engulfed in a fire so overwhelming, so total, so catastrophically complete that the provincial governor's office confirmed emergency firefighting teams are finding the blaze severely complicating containment efforts at the facility. The footage coming out of Lorestan shows what that language actually means in practice. A wall of fire and black smoke so dense and so expansive that it obliterates the structure beneath it, consuming the entire facility in an inferno that looks less like an industrial accident and more like the terminal stage of a deliberate, precisely executed demolition. No airstrike was reported. No missile was tracked inbound. No U.S. aircraft was overhead in the operational window when the fire began. No drone strike has been claimed or confirmed. Something, or someone, went in on the ground. And that single fact changes the entire strategic picture of what is happening to Iran right now in ways that the missile tallies and airstrike counts and ballistic trajectory analyses are completely failing to capture. Because if the strikes from above are what the world can see and measure and track on radar screens and satellite feeds, the ground operations, silent, deniable, physically intimate with the target, are what the world cannot see. And what the world cannot see is often what matters most. But let's back all the way up, because to understand the full weight of what a burning petrochemical refinery in Lorestan province actually means, you need to understand what petrochemical plants are, what they produce, what the Polac facility specifically was supplying, and why the people who plan military campaigns against Iran would put a facility like this, sitting in an inland province, far from the coastal military installations that have dominated the strike headlines, on a priority destruction list. This is not a fuel refinery in the ordinary civilian sense. This is not a facility that processes crude oil into gasoline for Iranian motorists. A petrochemical plant of the type operating in Lorestan province produces the chemical precursors and processed materials that feed military production at every level. Rocket propellants, explosives, motor casings for ballistic missiles, sealants and adhesives used in the assembly of drone airframes and guidance systems, rubber gaskets that seal propellant tanks and pressurized systems in missile bodies, the polymer compounds that form structural components in unmanned aerial vehicles, the specialty chemical compounds that go into the warhead casings of the cruise missiles the IRGC has been launching across the region. Every single weapon system that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has deployed in the current conflict, every ballistic missile fired toward Jordan, every drone launched at Bahraini airspace, every cruise missile aimed at American military positions, required materials that facilities like the Polac Petrochemical Refinery produce. You cannot build a ballistic missile out of steel and ambition alone. You need the chemical compounds, the processed materials, the specialty outputs of exactly the kind of industrial facility that is now burning beyond control in Lorestan province. Destroying it does not just eliminate current weapons. It attacks the industrial supply chain that produces the next generation of weapons, and the generation after that. This is infrastructure sabotage at the level of strategic military production. And whoever did it, whether the CIA, whether Israeli Mossad, whether a combination of intelligence services working in coordinated fashion, whether Iranian opposition elements acting under direction from external principles, chose a target that the aerial campaign cannot easily replicate in its effect. You can destroy a missile launcher with an airstrike. You need someone on the ground, inside the perimeter, in direct physical contact with the facility's most vulnerable points to destroy the chemistry that builds the next missile. Now here is the detail that makes the Lorestan explosion even more significant than its immediate industrial impact. This is not the first time. The pattern of mysterious explosions, unexplained fires, and infrastructure destruction events at Iranian military and industrial facilities has been a persistent feature of this conflict at every stage, before the open fighting began, during the ceasefire that preceded the current round of strikes, and now as the ceasefire has officially ended and full military operations have resumed. These fires do not appear randomly at civilian facilities. They appear at facilities with direct military production relevance. They appear at moments of strategic significance in the broader campaign, as if coordinated with the operational tempo of the aerial campaign to produce simultaneous pressure on multiple layers of Iranian military capability that no single instrument of national power could achieve alone. The ceasefire that briefly paused direct military exchanges did not pause these mysterious fires, they continued, and the intelligence community watching them, tracking their location, timing, target selection, and operational pattern, drew conclusions about what they represented that have not been publicly stated but are operationally unmistakable to anyone reading the pattern with serious analytical attention. Ground-based sabotage operations, running parallel to and in coordination with aerial strike campaigns, represent a combined arms approach to degrading an adversary's military capability that is qualitatively different from what any single domain of military action can achieve. The airstrikes take out what is visible, fixed, and targetable from above. The ground operations take out what is buried, dispersed, protected, or otherwise positioned to survive aerial attack. Together, they create a degradation effect that covers the full spectrum of Iranian military production and sustainment in a way that leaves no safe category of infrastructure. The Polac Petrochemical Refinery was not a coastal installation. It was not a radar array sitting on a headland overlooking the Strait of Hormuz. It was not a naval base with speedboats sitting in visible moorings. It was an inland industrial facility in Lorestan province, the kind of target that does not appear on a standard airstrike package map, the kind of target that requires human intelligence, physical access, and operational execution at ground level to destroy. And now it is gone. That is not a coincidence in the context of the current military campaign. That is a data point in a pattern that tells a story about the depth and sophistication of the intelligence and operations architecture being applied against Iran simultaneously with the public air campaign. Now let's address the political dimension that is running concurrently with the military operations. Because the announcement that came from President Trump on the same day as the Lorestan explosion is a strategic document as much as a political statement. And reading it correctly requires unpacking every layer of what it says and what it deliberately leaves ambiguous. Trump posted on Truth Social that the Islamic Republic of Iran has asked to continue talks, and that the United States has agreed to do so, but that the ceasefire is over. The word over in all capitals. The construction of that statement is worth examining with more care than the headline treatment it has received, because the simultaneous assertion of two apparently contradictory positions, we will talk to you when the ceasefire is over, is not a contradiction. It is a strategy. And understanding it as a strategy rather than a contradiction is essential to understanding where this conflict goes in the coming days. What the statement actually communicates to Tehran is this: the United States will conduct diplomatic engagement at whatever level the Iranians are willing to sustain, while simultaneously maintaining and expanding the military campaign. The bombing does not pause for the talking. The talking does not constrain the bombing. The two tracks run in parallel, and the outcome of the military track, the progressive, confirmed, officially declared escalating degradation of Iranian military infrastructure, is being used to generate leverage in whatever diplomatic track exists alongside it. This is negotiating with bombs, not as a rhetorical flourish, as a literal operational doctrine being applied in real time. The logic of this approach, understood from the inside of it, is coherent in a way that the surface-level reading of how can you bomb someone and negotiate with them simultaneously misses entirely. Every wave of strikes that degrades Iranian military capability narrows the range of options available to the IRGC when it sits across from any negotiating table. Every missile storage site destroyed, every drone factory burning, every rail bridge cut, every petrochemical plant gone in a mysterious fire is a piece of leverage that did not exist before that asset was destroyed. The military campaign is building the negotiating hand simultaneously with fighting the war, and the public statement that the ceasefire is over while talks may continue is designed to make that leverage visible to Tehran without making it so explicit that Iranian domestic political constraints prevent the regime from engaging. The Iranian response to Trump's statement was predictable to the point of being almost formulaic, and it was exactly what strategic analysis of the Islamic Republic's political communication patterns would have forecasted. Iran's Fars news agency, citing a source close to the Iranian negotiating team, immediately denied that any talks had been finalized, dismissed reports of preparations for meetings in Islamabad as having no basis in reality, and insisted that any developments in the diplomatic arena would come only through official Iranian channels. Read that statement carefully, because it is not the same as saying there will be no talks. It is saying the talks that other people are describing are not our talks. Any talks that exist will be on our terms, announced through our channels, framed through our official narrative. It is a statement about control of the diplomatic narrative rather than a categorical rejection of the diplomatic track itself. Iran is not saying it will not talk. Iran is saying it will not allow Washington to define the terms and timing of the talking in a way that makes the Islamic Republic appear to be negotiating under military duress. That distinction matters enormously for understanding where the diplomatic dimension of this conflict is actually located versus where it appears to be from the outside. Meanwhile, back-channel communications through Qatar, which has historically served as the diplomatic intermediary between Washington and Tehran, when direct communication channels are officially closed, are reported to be active. Qatar is delivering messages. Washington is using that channel to communicate the same message that the Truth Social Post communicated publicly. The ceasefire is over, the bombing will continue, and the terms for any diplomatic resolution will be shaped by the military reality on the ground. That is the dual-track framework, and it is now fully operational. Now let's talk about the aircraft carriers, because their movement in the hours since the ceasefire announcement tells you something about the operational intentions behind that announcement that no diplomatic statement could communicate with the same clarity. The USS Abraham Lincoln is confirmed positioning approximately 150 miles off the Iranian coastline, pushing north to bring its fighter jets within operational range of Iranian territory. The USS George H.W. Bush is confirmed at approximately 162 kilometers from the coast, pushing north on the same vector. Both carrier strike groups moving simultaneously toward Iran, both positioning to place their aircraft wings within strike range, both making this movement in the immediate window following the ceasefire announcement in the context of resumed fighting and renewed bombing operations. When both U.S. aircraft carriers in a theater move simultaneously toward the adversary's coastline in the operational hours following an official statement that the ceasefire is over, they are not positioning for defensive patrol operations. They are positioning for sustained, extended offensive strike operations. The carrier is the platform. Its aircraft are the weapons delivery mechanism. Moving both carriers simultaneously to within strike range of Iranian territory doubles the number of aircraft available for tasking, doubles the sortie rate capacity, doubles the sustained strike tempo the American military can maintain over Iranian targets without depending on land-based airfields or extended transit distances. Doubling. At the moment, the ceasefire officially ends. Flight radar data, confirming multiple refueling tankers active over the Persian Gulf simultaneously with the carrier movements, adds the final operational piece. Tankers in the air mean fighters in the air. The entire logistical support architecture of a sustained air campaign, the fuel that keeps the fighters on station, the aerial refueling that extends their operational range, the tanker fleet that turns a short-range fighter jet into a platform capable of striking deep into Iranian territory and returning safely, is already airborne and operational. The fighters can be turned toward Iran at any moment. The infrastructure to sustain that turn is already in place and already functioning. This is not a posture of negotiating readiness. This is a posture of immediate strike readiness, maintained simultaneously with whatever diplomatic traffic is moving through Doha. And the Iranians can see it on their radar screens, on satellite imagery, on the same flight tracking systems available to any serious intelligence service. The carrier movements are not concealed. The tanker flights are visible. The message they send to Tehran is the same message the Truth Social Post sent, just written in the language of hull positions and airborne refueling orbits rather than social media all caps. Now, let's go deep on the kill list, because this dimension of the conflict has moved from background context to explicit, confirmed, legally active Iranian political process, in a development that has received nowhere near the analytical weight it requires. President Trump, speaking to the New York Post, confirmed that he has left specific instructions for action should Iran succeed in its plot to assassinate him. The instructions, as reported, are direct and unambiguous. Bomb Iran at levels they have never seen before. Those are the contingency orders left by the sitting president of the United States in the event of his assassination by Iranian operatives. Not a diplomatic response, not a calibrated escalatory package, bombing at levels they have never seen before. Read that again. Because it is arguably the most consequential statement made by any party in this conflict, and it has been almost entirely lost in the coverage of missile exchanges and airstrike tallies. A presidential assassination contingency order is not a negotiating position. It is not a threat designed to deter through its severity. It is an operational instruction left in the official record to be executed by whoever assumes command in the event that the instruction becomes necessary. The instruction is not subject to further deliberation, further intelligence assessment, or further calibration by the decision maker who issued it, because the decision maker who issued it would, by definition, no longer be available to deliberate, assess, or calibrate anything. The instruction is, if they kill the president, bomb them at levels they have never seen before. In the context of a conflict already involving Tomahawk cruise missiles striking an Iranian nuclear facility, and official U.S. military statements confirming that operations are intentionally getting larger with each successive wave, the phrase, levels they have never seen before, acquires a meaning that is not comfortable to sit with analytically, but which cannot be avoided. And this is not merely a contingency left in the abstract. Iranian lawmakers are actively moving to institutionalize the assassination target list through legislation. An Iranian lawmaker named Savedi called on Parliament to fast-track legislation, specifically targeting Trump and other U.S. and Israeli officials, a legislative process that would transform what is currently an operational IRGC program into an official act of the Iranian state, endorsed by the Iranian parliament, enshrined in Iranian law. CNN has reported that Israel passed Washington unverified intelligence about a possible Iranian assassination plot against the president specifically. In the circumstances of Air Force One's recent departure from Turkey, the aircraft switch, the closed window blinds, the elevated defensive protocols, demonstrated that the American security apparatus assessed the threat as credible at a level that changed operational procedures for protecting the commander-in-chief. A banner hung in Mashhad reading, "We will kill Trump," displayed at city scale in one of Iran's largest and most religiously significant cities, as a public declaration of institutional intent. That is not a spontaneous expression of popular anger. In the Islamic Republic of Iran, public displays at that scale in that city do not happen without institutional sanction. The banner represents an officially tolerated, publicly displayed declaration of assassination intent against the sitting president of the United States. Now let's map what all of this means together. The ground sabotage, the carrier movements, the dual-track strategy, the assassination contingency orders. Because the mainstream coverage of this conflict is treating each element as a separate story, and none of these elements can be understood correctly in isolation. What you are looking at, as of July 11th, 2026, is a conflict that is operating simultaneously across 5 distinct domains, each of which is advancing on its own track while feeding and amplifying the others. The aerial kinetic domain is the most visible. U.S. airstrikes across the Iranian coastline and increasingly into the interior. Tomahawk cruise missiles at Bushehr, rail bridges destroyed in Golestan, power plants struck in the south, carrier aircraft positioning for expanded operations as both the Lincoln and the Bush push north toward strike range. This domain is confirmed, documented, officially acknowledged by CENTCOM, and getting larger by official American declaration with each successive wave. The ground intelligence and sabotage domain is the least visible and arguably the most strategically significant in the long term. The Polac Petrochemical Refinery, the pattern of mysterious fires at military-relevant industrial facilities that has continued without pause through ceasefire and active combat alike. The physical destruction of the supply chain that builds the weapons rather than the weapons themselves. This domain is deniable, scalable, and operates in the spaces between the officially acknowledged air campaign, filling in the target categories that aerial strikes cannot efficiently address. The maritime domain is the strategic driver of the entire operation, the original casus belli from which everything else flows. The Strait of Hormuz, the IRGC's campaign of harassment against commercial shipping and civilian mariners that produced the CENTCOM mandate to degrade Iran's ability to threaten freedom of navigation. The speedboat fleet that has been decimated. The coastal radar and surveillance architecture that has been systematically blinded. The naval installations that have been struck from the air, and now both American carrier strike groups pushing toward the Iranian coast, adding a surface maritime presence of formidable offensive capacity to the aerial and ground operations picture. The diplomatic domain is running quietly alongside the kinetic domains in Qatar, where back-channel communications are moving between Washington and Tehran through Qatari intermediaries. This domain is the most uncertain and the most subject to deliberate misrepresentation by both sides. Trump publicly asserting talks are ongoing, Iran publicly denying it, both positions reflecting real institutional interests, rather than transparent factual description of what is actually happening in the Doha channels. What can be said with confidence is that some form of communication is moving. What cannot be said with confidence is what that communication contains, how seriously either side is engaging it, or whether it represents a genuine de-escalation pathway or a procedural fiction maintained by both sides for different political purposes. The personal targeting domain, the assassination threat against the U.S. president, the Iranian legislative process to formalize it, the Air Force One security protocols, the presidential contingency orders, is the domain that has the potential to transform every other domain instantaneously if it moves from threat to attempted execution. A successful, or even partially successful, assassination attempt against a sitting American president in the context of an active military conflict with Iran would trigger contingency orders that have already been officially described as bombing at levels never seen before. The personal targeting domain is low probability on any given day, but carries consequences of such extraordinary magnitude that its analytical weight in any serious assessment of conflict trajectory should be correspondingly enormous. 5 domains, all active simultaneously. All advancing on their own tracks, all feeding into each other's escalation dynamics. Now for the 3-track convergence analysis that the operational reporting continues to miss. The financial track is being compressed from multiple directions simultaneously. The dual carrier positioning, both the Lincoln and the Bush pushing north toward the Iranian coast, signals to global oil markets that the Persian Gulf is entering an elevated operational threat environment. Tanker operators watching 2 American carrier strike groups move toward Iran do not interpret that movement as a de-escalatory signal. They interpret it as preparation for expanded military operations in the world's most critical energy transit corridor. The insurance premium implications respond to that signal immediately, automatically, and at a scale that translates directly into consumer fuel costs across Europe, Asia, and the United States within days. The 10 million barrels of Iranian oil rushed to sea in a single window to escape American tanker seizures tells you the Islamic Republic is already operating under financial pressure, severe enough to produce panicked, large-scale rapid repositioning of its most liquid revenue-generating asset. The military track has now added 2 qualitatively distinct new elements that the airstrike summaries alone do not capture. The first Is the ground sabotage dimension revealed by the Lorestan explosion, which represents a different kind of military pressure than aerial bombardment, one that operates inside the defensive perimeter rather than above it, that attacks the production supply chain rather than the deployed inventory. And that is deniable in a way that conventional airstrikes are not. The second is the carrier positioning, which doubles the American strike capacity in the theater at the precise moment the ceasefire ends and the official U.S. military position transitions to an intentionally and officially escalating operation. The psychological track is now operating at its most intense level since this conflict began. The presidential assassination threat, confirmed legislatively active, the subject of official American contingency orders, places the personal survival of the U.S. commander-in-chief inside the operational calculus of the conflict in a way that changes the stakes of every decision made on the American side. The mysterious explosions, unexplained fires, and ground sabotage pattern create a different kind of psychological pressure on the Iranian side. The pressure of not knowing which facility is next, not knowing who is inside the perimeter, not knowing which trusted infrastructure will be gone without warning in the next operational cycle. The combination of what can be seen from the air and what cannot be seen on the ground produces a security paranoia inside the Islamic Republic's leadership and military institutions that no aerial campaign alone can generate. The convergence of all three tracks simultaneously, financial compression, dual-domain military escalation, and the psychological pressure of both a transparent air campaign and an invisible ground operations network, creates a combined pressure effect that is qualitatively greater than the sum of its individual parts. And that convergence is now fully operational as of July 11th, 2026. Now let's go inside the Iranian command structure, because the dual-track diplomatic posture, publicly denying talks while privately communicating through Qatar, reveals something important about the internal political dynamics of a regime under simultaneous military, financial, and psychological pressure. The public denial of talks issued through Fars News, Iran's state media outlet closely linked to the IRGC's information infrastructure, and the private diplomatic communications moving through Qatar represent two different institutional voices inside the Islamic Republic speaking simultaneously and saying opposite things. The IRGC's institutional voice, channeled through state media, is the voice of escalation, defiance, and no negotiation under fire. The political leadership's voice, moving through Qatari intermediaries, is something more ambiguous, not negotiating from strength, not negotiating from acceptance of defeat, but communicating, keeping a channel open, allowing messages to pass. The existence of that channel, even in its current minimal form, tells you that somewhere inside the Islamic Republic's leadership structure, there is an institutional actor calculating that some form of diplomatic engagement, on terms that preserve regime legitimacy, or at least the appearance of it, is preferable to the alternative of unlimited military escalation with no exit. That actor is not the IRGC's information apparatus. It may not even be the Supreme Leader's office directly, but it exists. And its existence inside a system as institutionally fractured as the Islamic Republic is a variable that could, under the right conditions, produce a trajectory different from the one the public statements from both sides currently suggest. The problem is that the conditions under which that diplomatic actor could gain institutional traction inside Tehran are precisely the conditions that the IRGC's public commitments, multi-stage escalation, permanent Strait of Hormuz control, striking every Arab state that supported the campaign, make most difficult to create. To negotiate is to abandon the public commitments. To abandon the public commitments is to surrender IRGC institutional legitimacy in the eyes of the regime's own constituency. And losing IRGC institutional legitimacy in the middle of an active military campaign is an existential political risk that the IRGC's leadership will not voluntarily accept. The command structure gap between the diplomatic actor and the IRGC's institutional position is the most dangerous unresolved variable in the current conflict. Because if those two voices cannot reconcile, if the IRGC's institutional momentum toward escalation outpaces whatever diplomatic calculation exists in Tehran's quieter political councils, the outcome is not a negotiated pause. It is continued escalation into territory from which neither side can easily return. Here is the honest strategic assessment for July 11th, 2026. The United States is applying military pressure through at least two simultaneous domains, aerial strikes and ground-based sabotage operations, while positioning both carrier strike groups in the theater for expanded operations, maintaining a low-level diplomatic channel through Qatar as leverage rather than as a genuine de-escalation pathway, and operating with officially declared intentional escalation in the aerial campaign that, by American military statement, will continue to grow larger with each successive wave. Iran has lost its petrochemical production infrastructure at one of its most strategically important facilities. Its coastal military architecture has been systematically degraded through multiple strike cycles. Its drone production capacity in Bushehr province has been destroyed. Its China supply corridor through the Central Asian rail network has been severed. Its ballistic missile stockpile is being expended at a rate that outstrips replenishment capacity. Its air defense has been reduced to the point where American aircraft operate over Iranian territory with complete impunity. Its financial position is stressed enough that it is rushing 10 million barrels of oil to sea in a single window to escape tanker seizures. And its supreme leader is navigating a political environment in which the IRGC's public institutional commitments to unlimited escalation are constraining whatever private diplomatic instincts might otherwise lead toward a managed exit from the conflict. None of that points toward a near-term resolution. None of that describes the trajectory of a conflict approaching a natural de-escalation point. What it describes is a conflict in which the American pressure campaign is successfully degrading Iranian military capability across multiple domains simultaneously, while the Iranian political system is structurally constrained from accepting the implications of that degradation in a way that produces a negotiated outcome. The structural risk has not changed since yesterday. It has intensified. A leadership constrained from accepting military reality by institutional political commitments, operating through a fractured command structure with semi-autonomous components under pressure with its most emotionally charged and institutionally committed actors, the IRGC, holding the loudest public voice, is a leadership capable of decisions in the next 72 hours that no actor in this conflict, including the Iranian political leadership itself, may have fully sanctioned or anticipated. The ground beneath that burning petrochemical refinery in Lorestan province tells you something that no satellite image of a missile launch can tell you. It tells you that the people applying pressure to Iran are not only inside the planes flying above its territory. They're inside the perimeter. They're inside the country. They're inside the facilities. And the fires they start are not visible on radar until the smoke is already rising too high to be stopped. Both carriers are pushing north. Both are almost within range. The tankers are already in the air above the Persian Gulf. The fighters that fly with them can be turned toward Iran without prior notice, on command. At any moment the orders come through. The ground operations are continuing in facilities that Iran cannot fully protect because it does not fully know which facility is next. The ceasefire is over. The bombing is expanding. The mysterious fires are burning. And the instructions left by the Commander-in-Chief of the United States military in the event that Iran succeeds in its documented and legislatively active effort to assassinate him are 4 words that leave nothing ambiguous about what comes after. Whatever is burning in Lorestan tonight is not the last fire that will start without warning inside Iran's borders. The pattern established across months of this conflict, through ceasefires and active combat alike, has never paused. It has only gotten more precise, more targeted, and more strategically consequential with each successive operation. The smoke rising over the Polac refinery is a message written in the language that ground operations speak. And Tehran, watching both carriers push north while that smoke climbs into the sky above Lorestan, is reading it with the full understanding of what it means, even if official Iranian channels will never publicly say so. The mystery in this case is not who did it. The mystery is what burns next.